Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to OpenHour. Today we're going to be talking about lead. Lead is a known toxin. There are no safe levels of lead for humans. Yet it's also a heavy metal that's common in our everyday environment. Historically, it's been used in paints and pipes and gasoline. In this open hour, we're going to spend some time exploring lead detection and monitoring and a new lead data initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder effort addressing environmental lead exposure and lead poisoning prevention, led by, and I had to think about that, if there was a better word, organized by a public lab fellow, Reed Holman, who's on the line. So very excited to talk about this today and anything that comes to the table around it. And we'll just start off with some brief intros going around, and we will intro anyone else who comes and joins today. So Reed, you're actually in my upper left-hand corner. Can you do a kickoff intro for us with your name, where you're calling in from, and what is specifically interesting to you about this call?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Reed. I'm calling in from Oakland, California. I am specifically interested in this call because I'm the primary presenter, I guess. So yeah, I'm like exploring this whole concept, and I'm really interested in hearing folks' reactions and hearing how other people are working in the area of lead at all, and hoping a really great conversation comes out of it.
Great, thank you. And on my little screen, Liz, you're next. Are you available?
Sure. Hi, my name is Liz Barry. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm calling in from Brooklyn. Thanks.
Bronwyn.
Hi, I'm Bronwyn. I'm especially interested in sort of lead testing tools and methods, and I'm also calling in from Brooklyn.
Great. And Ira, is that how you pronounce your name?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm just really listening. I know nothing about this.
That's great. Thanks for joining on. Jeff, are you available? Where you're calling in from and what you're interested in chatting about in the topic?
Hi, this is Jeff. I'm calling in from Providence, Rhode Island. And I've seen folks working on different aspects of lead testing and sort of grassroots or community-based lead monitoring in different ways over the past few years, and interested to sort of hear, some of the latest.
Great, thanks. And Josh, are you available to go off mute?
Yeah, so I'm part of a effort in Chicago where we're, trying to get access to analytical equipment and repair it and make it useful for people. And one of the most interesting applications is environmental, and we actually have worked with DePaul University before and hoping to do so some more. So, just trying to see what's out there and learn more from people.
Great, thanks. And again, my name is Stevie Lewis. I'm calling in from Miami. And I'm interested in the topic generally. I'm interested also in some of the off-the-shelf versions of lead testing that we've seen and how those might be comparing to some of the other methods that people are discussing now more recently. Something I'm interested in. Great. Well, until we get anyone else who joined on the line, I'm going to pass it over to Reed.
Great. So I have a number of slides. Do I hit a button here to share my screen?
Sure. On the bottom, there's a green button that says share, and you should be able to select which one. The easiest one is probably your desktop, so we'll just see what you see. So if you go run through your slides that way. And just keep in mind, I think we have one, maybe two people on the phone, so if you want to talk to them as well, that'd be great.
Got it. So there's a couple people on the phone that can't see slides.
Not sure, but there's at least one person on the phone.
Okay, that's fine. What I am hoping to do here is provide some general background on lead, at least my understanding of it in terms of long form history, its health implications, some primarily government regulatory work that gets us to our current day, hone in on a particular problem that this lead data initiative is meant to address, and then be able to present a little bit as to what this lead data initiative is, or at least could be, because it is actually a work in progress. And then, yeah, hopefully that'll provide some space for feedback and conversation to come out of it. I'm realizing I would like to play the slides.
I think maybe if you go to view, and then I think you can do slide. Yeah, there you go.
Great. Got it. Okay. Great. So some like basic stuff on lead. I think most people know that it's bad. It is particularly bad for children, and that is because of its neurological implications. What most people don't realize is that lead is also very bad in adults. I'm not going to read through each of these, but it's a host of issues. One thing that is interesting about lead, and for me makes it a particularly interesting problem to address, and in many ways an easier problem than others when it comes to environmental issues, is that there is no safe level of lead. Like, it is all bad. It is all bad. There have been no health utilities like within the human body for lead, and that's different than a lot of other metals out there. For example, copper. Actually, your body needs a little bit of copper, and so that makes I think discussions about mitigating exposure to copper more difficult than lead. But lead is just like, it's all bad. So we're trying to minimize all exposure to it. Most exposure and discussion around lead and lead poisoning is generally around the realm of high-level lead exposure that can cause significant developmental delays, excuse me, developmental delays, and even like extreme cases, death. What actually is less discussed are the effects of low dose exposure, and I think this is really important, in part because of really great work that's happened over the last few decades on reducing the amount of lead in the environment, or at least nearly contributed in the environment, and really great work in reducing lead exposure to humans. The next frontier of this work is really honing in on the fact that, again, there are no safe levels of lead exposure, and even very low doses can cause issues that are harder to track, harder to measure, but indeed do have serious implications on individuals' health and overall community health. What I'll go ahead and do is work through these slides, but actually, if anybody, since it's a small group, wants to like jump in and ask a question, feel free to do so. So not only is lead bad, but it's kind of everywhere, right? So this is a significant issue. And one of the reasons why it's everywhere is because it's a very useful metal. Someone once told me and described it as the plastic of like the 19th and 20th centuries. In the same way that plastic is like used all over the place now, lead was used all over the place then. It's very malleable, it's very useful for a host of industries. It got incorporated into paints, pipes, gasoline, food containers, toys, cosmetics, kind of across the board. As I've grown into this particular knowledge space, I continue to be surprised actually at how common lead is and products that I didn't even realize were there, such as spices, like a lot of spices historically, and still a number of spices, particularly those that are brought in from a handful of countries, can have lead in it, and it can be problematic. Quick regulatory history. These are like really great wins for the public health world. Right, 1970, EPA was created, put in charge of lead. We've got a ban in lead paint. There was in the 70s, a ban in lead pipes that occurred in the 80s. A phased ban in fuel eventually ended in the 90s. This last item is just to note that like a lot of these regulations continue to get updated, and it's still an ongoing conversation. In fact, this happened very recently, and it just kind of blew me away. And I point out this example, not to necessarily say that this is a problem that we all need to particularly pay attention to and just address, but just to say, like, again, lead is kind of all over the place. I did not even realize that lead was in men's hair coloring products. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about them yet. But like pretty soon, I'm going to have to worry about going gray and changing my hair. And thankfully, the FDA is on top of this. But only very recently have they put forth this particular ban. And in fact, the company behind this is fighting the ban, and these products continue to be sold in stores all over the country. So if we look at the regulatory history, the main ones to really think about when it comes to exposure are these. And with incredible success, right? So this is a chart that shows elevated blood lead levels for children younger than 6 years age within this particular time frame. You can see like really great trends. These are really positive signs. One thing that I'll highlight is that this is data that's coming from blood lead levels in children, not necessarily from the environment, but in children, and that's something I'll just highlight here because it'll be relevant in at a later slide. So those are all good things, right? Those regulations have reduced the amount of new lead that's going into the environment. But the problem is lead is a heavy metal, and it doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't just disappear. And so we have what often people call legacy lead that we have to now work with and deal with. These are just a couple stats. Interestingly enough, I actually could not find a great stat on the amount of lead that appears to be out there or could be out there in soil. If anybody happens to have one, I would love to have it because that is a significant source of lead in communities across the country. You know, Flint is a story that really brought, I think, the issue of lead to the American conscious, at least in the modern day. And because of Flint, a number of cities, of localities, a number of big reports have been published that have brought renewed interest in the area of lead exposure. My general read on lead is that a lot of people, and I say this coming from public health community myself, I have a master's in public health, a lot of people see lead as a 20th century problem. One that was significant, and then we passed these regulations, and is now less significant, and that there are bigger things to worry about. And there are a lot of big things that do need to be worried about now, but as we're seeing, lead continues to impact health in cities across the country. Like a really interesting exercise is you could just take any random city in the country, even the one you happen to be living in, and just Google or whatever your favorite search engine might happen to be. Put in your city and put in lead poisoning and or put in lead in water, and just click on the news results and see what happens. And there's a pretty good chance you're going to find something. Because of really because of Flint, lead and water issues are the items that are hitting the headlines more. Lead in soil continues to be a significant source for folks across the country, and lead in paint. But just because it's a bit more timely and creates a bit more buzz, lead in water is a really big issue, especially when lead and water issues hit local schools. So there's quite a bit of news out there. And in fact, just to hit it on the head, at the height of the Flint crisis, there was a reporter, a Reuters report that found 3,810 communities had lead poisoning rates at least double that of Flint, which is like a wild, wild number. So this is all to say, like, lead is a really big problem, right? But we're really, I think, shifting to a big new era where previously a lot of the work was in preventing new sources of lead from entering the environment. Now we're in a space where we need to figure out how to remove lead from the environment. That could be incredibly expensive. So at least in the near term, we're looking at ways to reduce exposure to particularly at-risk individuals like children, and hopefully ultimately eliminate exposure. And importantly, removing lead is one set of activities that mainly a local government could take on. That is done in parallel, but is different from efforts that could reduce or eliminate exposure. So it's an important distinction to keep in mind. Now, the problem underneath all of this is that we actually don't know how big the problem is. That is to say, even though we know lead is bad and we know that it's everywhere, we don't actually know really where it is. And to say we don't have enough information, we don't have enough data on the particular places where lead exposure is highest within communities, and which individuals, again, particularly children, may be highest at risk. So this is the underlying problem that actually the Lead Data Initiative has been to address. And part of this is because of just the general way that the world of public health has been set up to monitor for lead. The public health system, if we look at this very first, I guess that's not quite a bullet, but first item on this list, the public health system is really set up where our primary systemic mode for monitoring and finding out where lead is children actually go to the pediatrician, and then they get tested. If their blood lead levels are high enough, then the pediatrician actually hands the case over to the county Department of Public Health, who then is supposed to reach out to the family, conduct a home inspection, and determine where the source of the lead is. There are some other issues here about how we currently monitor for lead. There's some regulatory requirements. I won't go too deeply into those. Those are put forth by the EPA. There are, of course, very big one-off official testing. So if you, many of the articles I listed on a previous slide happened because some public official said, hey, we need to test, for example, all the schools and see what the heck is out there. And then, of course, this last item is really, really important, that sometimes communities just sort of have to do it themselves. Now, each of these has a series of problems. The one at the top, I think, is most pointed, which is that our current public health system literally is using children as our lead monitoring devices, which is like, I think, a problem. Yeah, so what we're trying to do is basically look at the future and how we can do this in new ways. Enter the Lead Data Initiative. This is a work in progress, and that is why I've got this cheeky little tagline here. So I have been funded, and I'm working as a fellow in public lab to work for 9 months. I'm 3 months into it. And for the next 6 months, we're going to be honing in on defining exactly what this Lead Data Initiative is and looks like. What we've done over the last 3 months is really hone on what you have already seen, which is understanding and really identifying some of these core underlying problems. And now we're hoping to work with you that are on this call, as well as others out there, to build a community of folks looking to build the new world and how we actually monitor and manage exposure of lead in communities. And this is the actual tagline that I've currently been using because it seems catchy enough and seems to capture things. And we're doing this work by primarily focusing on two groups. One is working directly with local governments because the work of lead remediation happens at the local level. And the second is to work directly with community scientists that are looking to test their own environment. In large part, or often, these community scientists are testing their home environment in spite of local government efforts. These are very distinct communities that we're supporting. On the latter first, these are things that we are hoping to engage everybody here and folks that are listening to this webinar. You're a community scientist, whether that means you're more of a community member or more of a scientist, whatever, like we would love your help in figuring out answers to these particular questions. This top item is actually a really big and important issue. Stevie, I know at the very beginning of this call, you mentioned how you're interested in other methods. I don't have a dedicated slide to that, but we can dive into it more later if you'd like. But one fundamental challenge, and actually one reason why we don't have a lot of great data, is that it's very expensive to test for whether we're talking about testing for lead water or testing for lead paint, soil, etc. We need cheaper, more reliable methodologies. Top methodologies include inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. If you're scientifically inclined, those are machines that cost over $100,000, and they exist within universities and private lab settings, certainly not available to your common community scientist. There are some really cheap, low-cost things you can find at like your home department store and even online. The problem is that none of these low-cost DIY methods have been fully validated by the EPA. They have significant limitations and are generally frowned upon by the scientific community. So there's a huge need and indeed a huge opportunity to really think about new methods or low-cost technologies and tools that could help empower community scientists and, in the spirit of the Lead Data Initiative, generate new data that can be useful. I think really, though, a primary focus of this Lead Data Initiative is going to be working directly with local governments and helping them shift the paradigm. I laid this out previously where this is kind of the current state. Children get their blood tested for the presence of lead. The pediatrician hands it over to the county, and that's how it mostly works, or, well, even sometimes doesn't work across the country. The future state is one that is in line with 21st century technology, where it turns out there's data all over the place, including data generated by community scientists, as well as formal records and public data such as that from census and housing that can be brought together. And you can actually analyze that data and spit out useful analytics, useful results that allows a county to, instead of being reactive only when a child is already poisoned, to be able to identify individuals and homes where lead exposure is highest at risk. And then you can actually go in and address the issue before it happens. That's a future state, and it is a little futuristic, but it's actually not that far off. There are a number of very big questions that have to be answered. And fundamentally, these questions are ones that we hope to work directly with local governments to answer, to help them get from this current state to the future. And the good news is that there's some really great examples. Josh, I heard you were from Chicago. I've been working somewhat closely with a few great people within the University of Chicago and the City of Chicago that are doing some really cool stuff. And in fact, they seem to be further along than anyone else that I've been able to find in doing exactly this. They've gathered data from across sources, including healthcare records, housing and home inspection records, and elsewhere. And they've then analyzed it, and they've better able to spit out a map so that the City of Chicago, when they're thinking about how to best use their resources, instead of just kind of guessing on where they should go in to inspect homes and try to remediate lead issues, they can start at the top of the list. And at the top of the list is a particular household that is put there based upon data plus analytics. They continue to work on this. It's somewhat far along. It is in place. There are, of course, a lot of things that they continue to work out and work on, but it's very, very promising. Some other really interesting data related stuff. We mentioned lead in pipes is everywhere. what's kind of scary is that a lot of cities actually don't know where their lead pipes are. Even scarier is the fact that a number of cities mandated the use of lead pipes at one point. And so we've got cities with lead pipes across the board, and these records that indicate where the lead pipes are usually found on like little note cards sitting in the back of someone's office. There are a handful of cities that have been able to figure out how to convert those hand cards into digital assets that can then be mapped. And so this is an example from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has been able to do exactly that. A number of other cities have done the same. You can imagine this data not only being useful immediately for an individual that's trying to determine their own risk of lead exposure, but this data could also feed back into the larger model that I presented earlier, the Chicago example. City of Tucson has not only done some really great work in identifying where the lead service lines are, they actually have recently, well, as of a month ago, I think they completed this program, where they were able to identify the exact, let's see, they were able to identify which of their pipes in the city were most likely to be lead. And then they targeted those areas and began to replace those first. There's a similar story in a number of other cities, actually, including Flint. This is one where I highlighted in Tucson just because they actually also created this amazing story map. I assume these slides will be available later. Will be available later if you click on that link there. It's just a really beautiful, transparent effort that describes the history of lead in Tucson water pipes and actually the story of what they did to identify the pipes that had lead in them and to remove them. Let's see, is that what I wanted to do next? Here we go. From a strategy perspective, obviously the country is very big. There's a lot of lead, and we are in the very exploratory stages. And so what we're actually wanting to do to be able to hone in on our efforts and to be able to test out more specifically some ideas that we have is to have formal pilots. And so right now we're actually seeking local governments who are interested in participating in what we're calling an initial round of the Lead Data Initiative. The way this would work is a city and multiple signatures would need to be involved. This is a pretty big deal. A city would commit to 1, 2, 3, and in return they get XYZ. Now, exactly what 1, 2, 3 are and XYZ are is subject to the work that I'm currently doing and any feedback you guys might have. You can imagine a city commits to not only using data, perhaps they commit to publishing the location of the lead service lines. Perhaps they commit to running a number of community engagement meetings. Perhaps they commit to publishing their methodologies on how they implement the lead and copper rule. If you guys are familiar with that, that's an easy item to gain. A lot of cities, unfortunately, do. So this is an opportunity for us to say, hey, cities, we want you to do these things. And in return, we could actually support them in some way. We've got a number of folks across the country that we think we've identified as sort of the leaders in the space, such as the group in Chicago. We can build community and help share best practices. We also are hoping to be able to provide a little bit of money to the cities to help them implement on the things that they commit to. Just a general timeline for what this looks like. We're probably only looking at like 3 to 5 cities. And so if you live in a city and you want to advocate for it to be yours, I'm all ears for that. And importantly, at the bottom, importantly, this is not a top-down effort. This is what you could call a co-design effort. So when I'm currently engaging cities, I sort of throw this out and I ask them to tell me, like, what could that 1, 2, 3 be? What could that XYZ be? Because we want to ensure that we're building something that is useful and that is something that they would actually join and get value out of. in addition to engaging those folks directly, there's some top-down support we want to do. So if a lot of this data stuff, particularly in the world of predictive analytics, could happen locally, there's actually a lot of stuff that's just national data that's already public that could be brought together to provide a general foundation of this data infrastructure. And there are a couple efforts that could be built off of. This is one that was led by some folks in the Washington State Department of Health. I've actually connected with them. And what's interesting is even though Vox Media published this particular map, the lead epidemiologist said, well, he'd actually do it quite differently. So I continue to engage in conversations with them. There's a couple other examples out there that help us perhaps build that national map and the sort of a big foundational data set. And then from the bottom up, this is engaging with the public lab community, the folks that are on the ground, the folks that are either working directly with cities, or if the city is not prioritizing this effort, then yeah, we can help equip and empower you, hopefully, to gather data and not just support from the bottom up, but perhaps put a little bit of pressure from the bottom up. And again, since strategically we're trying to identify some core cities within which to target, we're hoping to hone in our efforts in those communities. Yeah, I guess that's the end. I hope that presents a bit of my thinking about where my brain is. The last 3 months, the first 3 months of my fellowship have been very informative. I've been able to learn quite a bit. And the next 6 months are going to be instrumental in engaging the folks that are already doing like really important work around lead. I should say I'm not actually a lead expert. I mean, perhaps I'm quickly becoming one just because I've been diving into this space, but my background is more in like policy. I worked at the federal government for a number of years. I have a background more in policy and politics and community building. And so when we're talking about engaging folks on the ground around the issue of lead, one, I've never been on the ground. Two, I've never worked directly on lead. So I'm very reliant on folks that are on the ground and have worked on lead for the thoughts and feedback and engagement along the way. And I guess with that, I'll pause and hand it back over to you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Reed. That was great. Well, before we open the floor to some discussion and sharing questions, I wanted to say a quick hello to Joe Lee, if you're available. We did some intros when we first got on the line to just say our name, where we're calling in from, and something, if there's anything that specifically brought you to this call that you're interested in talking about. If you're available to go off mute and do a quick intro, that would be great. Okay, if not, that's fine. Feel free to unmute and say hello at any point. All right, at this point, I'll open up the floor. Does anyone have any discussion topics or questions to share related to this topic?
I have a question.
Go for it.
First question is any of this stuff available online? And what organizations are you working with? And what's the incentive of any public organization to work with you?
Yeah, great questions. I guess I'll mention this. The website leaddatainitiative.org does exist. It is a very beta website meant to inform the general ideas of basically what I just communicated. And so if there's a primary place to point folks online, it would be there. The other website would be within the public lab community, which is more where the conversations and day-to-day stuff is taking place. You can go to publiclab.org/lead, and that'll take you to sort of a series of pages. In terms of organizations that I'm engaging folks in different ways. There are a number of organizations that have been working on the issue of lead for quite some time. I'm thinking of organizations such as the National Resource Defense Council, National Center for Healthy Homes, the Environmental Defense Fund, some of these big nonprofit / advocacy organizations. And I've engaged each of them in sort of different capacities to learn from them, figure out what they're doing, and to throw out the idea, because one thing that is really, really critical for me is that we, one, build something that is useful, and two, we're not replicating efforts. It's actually been kind of interesting. I keep waiting for somebody to say, Reed, this is a bad idea, and or Reed, somebody else is already doing this, but that hadn't happened yet, and so we're still plugging away. Your last question about why would a local, let me be sure I got this right, why would a local government like participate or engage? Yeah. That comes back down to the structure of the pilot. And I think there's probably going to be two different levels that a local government and or folks working with local governments could engage. One is just a general community of practice. So there are folks across the country that are wrestling, with this issue. And just because of the nature of government and they're just very busy in their day-to-day work, sometimes it's hard to stick your head up and figure out what other folks are doing in similar cities across the country. I happen to be in a really privileged position where my job is to figure out what folks in different cities are doing. And to some extent, and I've had this validated in folks in different cities, merely creating opportunity for information sharing and best sharing practices is useful. And there's a level of engagement that I think that could happen there. The deeper engagement around this concept of pilots comes down to the particular contract and pilot details that we put together. So that's what that 1, 2, 3, and X, Y, Z are. And we certainly want to ensure that we're building something that is again, useful. And so we hope to be able to provide things that are of value. This could mean a little bit of money, although we have to go talk to large foundations that might offer and provide funding to us. This could mean offering different technical support, because capacity within a local government is a big issue. Not all local governments have top-tier data scientists, for example, or even have state-of-the-art technology platforms that they can operate off of. So I am actually fairly well connected to data science communities across the country, and we hope to bring them on as official partners. And then we also, this model, some work that I've done previously, hope to be able to bring in technology partners as well. So that if you are, Ira, where are you located again?
New York City.
Okay, well, New York City is that's a big place, and they've got lots of technology. But if you're in a smaller city like perhaps Raleigh or Charlotte, North Carolina, well, I'm just kind of picking them out. Sorry for anybody in Charlotte that is listening to this, but you know, if you don't have state-of-the-art technology, we hope to actually have technology companies as partners, and by engaging and participating as a pilot city, you would have access to those. So that's just a couple examples, but again, the specifics of what comes out of the specifics of the pilot agreement should come out of the conversations actually directed with the cities. And for what it's worth, New York City has already expressed interest, and we hope to engage them more deeply.
Now, to find out more, is there like some Twitter handles or Instagram handles or something like that?
Instagram. I haven't done Instagram yet. If you want to pick that up, you can lead our Instagram account.
But it may not lend itself, but at least it's Twitter or tweeting.
Yeah. There is a handle that's loosely affiliated with this. I've tried not to get in the communication business, just because that ends up being a lot of work, sometimes with little return. But there is a Twitter handle called Atomic82 News. And if you are a periodic table nerd, then you'll know that atomic number 82 is the atomic number for lead.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a good way to remember it.
Well, the funny thing about communicating lead is it looks like lead. So like often when you search for lead, leadership comes up a lot. And so I've been trying to think of different ways to do it. But Atomic82 News is actually a Twitter account that when I find something interesting, I tweet things out. But yeah, leaddatainitiative.org is the primary URL to probably stay on top of.
You know, what would you say, Reed, to actually subscribing to the tag lead on public lab?
Yeah. That's great. Can you describe what that is and looks like?
Sure. Hey, Ira, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, on publiclab.org, you can join that website and subscribe to the topics you're interested in. So you can create an account or link your Facebook or Twitter. And then that's kind of it's serving as the communications and community interaction part of this project. So that could be a good way to stay posted.
Yeah, that's actually the best spot, because the bigger website that I mentioned is meant to just be like a landing page that's flashy branding. But the real work is happening on publiclab.org. So I encourage folks to create an account and follow that tag.
Well, I'll give you a direct link in the chat. And also, as a New Yorker myself, Reed, I cannot, constrain myself from asking, are you talking to DEP here, or like mayor's office, or?
I'm a little hesitant to reveal my source at this point, but it's folks in the city. Yeah, I guess I just hesitate to say too strongly because I don't want to put somebody on the spot.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's just interesting because, before I met you and encountered your project, generally what we would hear was that New York City, like we heard people from outside New York City, like spoofing their own addresses just to use the good quality lead testing offered by DEP.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm just, like New York City is, I'm sure we do have lead problems, but also like, I don't know, we have very active agencies. So I don't know, I find it curious and excited that people want to work on this.
Yeah. The mayor recently appointed someone to be what's loosely being referred to as a lead czar. So one issue, as I think most of you know, with lead at the local level is that it's siloed across the different agencies. Housing is separated from water, is separated from environmental quality. And so what I haven't seen this elsewhere. So it appears to be unique, at least to my knowledge, to address some of the like cross-cutting issues. And in order to address lead holistically, they've appointed somebody to oversee all issues of lead. So I take that as a signal that the mayor's office is seeing this as an issue and prioritizing it.
I missed that. Here in New York, or?
In New York City.
We like our executives.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I have hesitated to engage New York City. It's so big, and on the early stages of initiative, I've been hoping to engage slightly smaller cities. But frankly, just like conversations keep coming up within a few different parts of the city that have kept conversations going.
I have a question about people's ability to get testing done under our current structures. I guess the reason I'm asking is, I was recently living in New Orleans, and had a friend couple who got their water tested, like sent off, tested, and got results about what was in their water. And I'm just wondering, like, how accessible is that? Like, who runs those systems? How accessible are they? Like, is that a very unique scenario? And who's running them? I guess I already asked that.
Yeah. Well, there are a few different ways to test for lead, and a challenging part about this whole domain is that testing for lead in water is a conversation, and testing for lead like in your soil and in paint is a different conversation. Since you brought up water, I'll just talk about that one. Yeah, so I guess there's a few ways that one can test their water for lead. It's required by law that every county provide a service to its citizens, a lead and water testing service to its citizens. Now, what's not required is that be free or low cost. And also what is not required is that happen and be like, happen quickly and be timely. And so what ends up happening is that across the country, there's just incredible variation. Some folks happen in counties where they offer free testing and fairly quickly. And those are great services to take advantage of. Other counties actually do charge a little bit. And a lot of counties, just because this is kind of the nature of government and particularly county government / city, if you're in a city-county structure, just have massive backlogs, and so may not get your result very quickly. But in terms of the public service offerings, technically those exist for everybody. There are, however, a number of private companies that are filling a lot of the demand. I actually tried to start one of these companies a year ago, and we were somewhat successful. But we found that there were a couple other companies further along than us. And so that's when I dropped the for-profit idea and ended up doing this sort of more nonprofit initiative-based concept. But those run all kind of the same model, where it's a website and you click a button, they send you an empty bottle with some instructions. You fill that bottle and you mail that off to either back to the company or directly to a lab that conducts the testing, and then they send you the results. It's actually worth noting here that in the concept of the Lead Data Initiative, and we're like, data exists in so many different places. Can we all just bring it together? Actually, one interesting source of data are these private companies. And I've engaged one of them, one of the larger ones, who has offered to share data. The challenge is that there are a lot of privacy issues that have to be overcome in order for that to actually happen. But yeah, there are some companies out there that provide for this.
And then just a quick follow-up, but when you get your water tested in that manner, who owns the data?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I look at it, my approach is more from the healthcare world. So there's a similar debate and conversation about who owns healthcare data. Is it the patient who is sick, or is it the hospital that has conducted the test? And I come from the school of thought that the patient owns their data because it is their data. Now, hospitals still use data. They anonymize and aggregate data so that they can work it into their business structure and address population health issues, et cetera. But fundamentally, my philosophy is that data belongs to the patient. And similarly, I think if you are testing your home, if you own the home, sort of thinking about this, really, I haven't thought too much about this, but I think if you own the home, you're testing your water, then sure, that's probably, I would say that's your data to control. Because there's a lot of important issues around, actually around stigma, that I think lend this conversation to empower the individual and their own little situation to have control over their local environmental data listed within their own home.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And just a note, we have about 7 minutes left in the open call, although we will leave the line open. But a quick thank you to everyone who has joined on, and I'll go ahead and leave it back open for discussion. Oh, but no one's tied to stay on if we do talk past the hour. Or anyway.
Hey, this is Jeff from Providence again, and I was just curious. 7 minutes may be not enough or too much, but I'm always interested kind of in how there's a range of different price points and accessibility points at which you can measure a particular thing. Like, there might be some $1 million scanner that you could use that would be perfect. There might be some, well, I've purchased like a 50-cent kit in like a science shop that was like test for lead, and it looks like it wouldn't be such good data, but who knows? And it was kind of cool because it used kitchen vinegar to fix the test. But presumably the data is not very good. They're coming out of this color changing strip. And there's also, of course, stuff where it's like detecting over a period of time versus in a moment. This is a bunch of range of things here, but I guess I'm sort of interested with any toxic, substance in what is the sort of spectrum of price and utility. And I'm not asking you to enumerate that like on the line right now off the top of your head, but I'm interested in sort of there being some kind of listing of like the pros and cons of lead testing approaches at different. Liz is sharing Reed's post about this, which is great in the chat. Reed, do you want to add to your post?
Yeah. So if you go to publiclab.org/lead for folks just listening, on there is a series of links, and one of them jumps to a post titled "List of Methods for Lead Detection and Monitoring."
Awesome.
So this is, great point, Jeff. And this is definitely worth like talking a little bit about. The way that I look at it is that if you look at the spectrum of really cheap or perhaps lower quality items, all the way up to the very expensive but higher quality items, things exist on the ends of the spectrum, but there's a massive gap in the middle that needs to be filled. The expensive ones are, like I mentioned, ICP-MS. There are XRF analyzers that are quote unquote cheaper. They're only like $10,000. And then at the super cheap, low cost level, these are the things you can find online and or like home renovation types of stores. Again, it depends on whether we're talking about like paint versus water, but there are various colorimetric tools out there, little dipstick types of things where you can stick a piece of paper and a water and it'll change colors depending upon the presence of lead. There's a place for those. I don't mean to suggest that no one should ever use those things, but they are not quite as advertised. I think it'd be interesting to engage in a conversation about how can we maybe build on those low-cost lead screening items, to like more formally evaluate when and where they can be used. But the important thing that I'll note is that no DIY at-home testing kit currently exists that has been fully validated by the EPA. One has been validated for its positive results, but not its negative results. So this is actually a deliberate space of work that I hope we, and whoever wants to jump in, that we can do over the next few months.
Can I have a...
That's great. Thank you.
Maybe you don't know this. Oh, hello.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to jump in if you don't mind. I'm part of an organization in Chicago. It's very slim, just a small nonprofit where, we're trying to get as much in the way of instrumentation up and running and made useful and public facing as possible outside of institutions. Though, unfortunately, for the most part, we've had to work with institutions in order to bring any money in, because, you know, the more a nonprofit is off mission, the easier it is for them to abuse and make profit. And so we're kind of starving artists, but starving scientists and all that sort of stuff more. And, you know, I've interfaced with Gretchen Gerke in the past. I let her know that we actually have an ICP-MS just in storage, but she said that probably the best thing to do with it, if, you know, we could ever get it up and running and in a suitable lab environment, is to, you know, decrease the cost of, you know, analytical methods. And certainly, like, beyond that, we have our only purchase ever. Everything else we've scrounged and repaired. You know, we have a portable X-ray fluorescence instrument, and that has been helpful in terms of interfacing with institutions and with the general public. In the case of DePaul, that was really nice because they put together a set of public-facing events where, you know, a lead public health fair, basically, where people would bring their water and soil, and we did it free of charge, and DePaul paid us some amount of money that was related to instrument rental, like equipment costs that they had set aside for this purpose. And yeah, so I think to the extent that we can use this more powerful equipment and cross-validate it with these cheaper, more uncertain methods, that'd be great. But unfortunately, other than the fact that we have a PXRF, a lot of laboratory equipment that we know is usable really can only be made useful in laboratory environments. And building out a lab environment that really has all of the fixings, the fume hood and solvent and acid storage, all of that is very difficult. So we're certainly trying to figure that out, but I am worried that community science efforts are not really, people don't know where to start, and you know, working with institutions only, they only have dribs and drabs of money for anything that's public facing.
Yeah, Josh, you're really highlighting a crux of the challenge for community science that's out there. And so I feel your struggle, for sure. I think one thing that you're also highlighting, although it is still difficult, is the potential for partnerships with local labs. And the ones that I've seen are successful. These are labs in local colleges and universities. There, again, like, you have to really cultivate relationships and figure out how to make it work. But there's some really great examples out there of partnerships with local colleges and universities working. Since you're in Chicago, and I know a couple of people in Chicago, I'm happy to connect offline to hear you out and hear about some of your struggles and see if I can help facilitate any conversations there. But
yeah, I actually already connected.
Just generally as a practice. Oh, great. All right.
Yeah, because Josh, actually, it's great to hear from you, Josh. Now, thanks for sharing more. I totally remember when we spoke before, and I forwarded your 2016 message about the lab equipment to the staff members currently on the call, which includes Reed. So great, you can pick it up on email.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Great. Well, we have reached the top of the hour here, but I do want to say hello. We have a new person who jumped on from a 715 number, which I believe is a Wisconsin number. But we're wrapping up the call here. So, and it will be posted online. If you want to refer back to anything that was talked to, if you go to publiclab.org/openhour-archive, it will be posted along with all the other open hours. But just a quick hello, if you want to say your name, where you're calling in from, and what brought you to the call today that you're interested in talking about with this topic, if you're available.
Yes, this is Pat Popple. from Wisconsin, and I'm working on frac sand mining issues, but also heavy metals in the water. Have been discussed quite a bit here. Actually, I only jumped in at the end because I thought it was at 8 o'clock, which is our time here, not realizing that it would have been at 7, probably your time. Anyway, all I want to say is that I'm on the verge of working, and so far successfully, with university locally, UW-Eau Claire, and we're going to be working on issues regarding air quality. And so far, a lot of people have jumped in, and we have an exciting group to work with, and also some financial support. So that is really interesting, and maybe in the future we can talk about successful ventures with scientists at some point in time. So thank you, Stevie, for allowing me to jump in.
Thanks, Pat. I'm so sorry we had some time zone confusion there, but I will share the link to the call at the end, and everyone's connected up on Public Lab if you ever want to share questions or ideas or comments that we didn't possibly have a chance to get to. But I will leave the line open as well.
Yeah, it's great to hear you, Pat. This is Liz saying hello over the internet from New York, and yeah, thanks for your constant work on this, and I'm glad for you to meet the other people on the call, which do include Reed Holman, who's leading the lead data initiative, and then Josh Henkin calling in from Chicago. He's a scientist with some interesting lab equipment and a nonprofit working on lead there, among other things. And then there's also Ira here in New York, who I met at, I believe, at a participatory democracy event a couple months ago.
I think so.
I think so. And then another pile of Public Lab staff. So anyways, and then to those of you listening, Pat is really a fantastic activist. So I'm glad you can all get to know each other.
Thank you, Liz, and hello to all.
Well, I feel like we are about to wrap up the call, but that might just be me. Any last questions?
Well, I have a question. I'm a little bit confused by what you say is EPA approved and what's expensive, not expensive, because I just Googled EPA approved lead test soil, and I noticed on the Public Lab listing that under soil there was 2 question marks. And I'm working with a group called Harbor Lab right now, and a common question is people ask, because we want to start a garden there with fruit coming out of the garden, people ask, is there lead in the soil? And I don't know how to answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to react. Soil is a bit of a blind spot for me. It's just, I guess it's like, I've been focusing most of my time on water and paint/dust. So anything you find that is like would answer those question marks I put, would love to incorporate them.
I'd like to pass this question to Bronwyn, actually. Is that okay, Bea?
Yeah, and I'll say it's sort of an area that we're working on. We have a couple of folks that have sort of worked out some methods for identifying lead in soil that maybe don't necessarily tell you exactly, how many parts per million or billion of lead that you've got, but that can sort of point you towards yes, there's lead, or
just a screening.
Sorry, say that again.
Just a screening. I'm not expecting anything
so
very specific.
And there's a method, and we're working to kind of get it up on the site as soon as we can. We also work with another group that has developed sort of a soil testing kit, and part of what they this is a kit that's sort of designed to kind of have samples sent off to a lab. So if you kind of know the set of things that you might be looking for in your urban garden soil, because it may not just be lead, which is an issue. Sometimes I think it does make sense to kind of put a little bit of money into an analysis that's really kind of going to get you a good picture of what it is that that you're working with. And so I think a lot of times the sort of the DIY methods and sort of the lab methods can work hand in hand. And one of the things the DIY methods can do is sort of help you get an idea of what it is that you need to follow up a little bit on. But we're working a lot to sort of get a bunch of our soil resources kind of built up, over the next few months. So,
that's a good answer.
Yes.
I realize now that, people are asking about the lead, but they're not asking, is there anything in the soil that can harm me?
Yeah.
Which is a better question.
And I think some of those questions you can kind of answer by kind of looking around and figuring out what's upstream or downwind or upwind from where you are, because lead certainly is an issue, but it's not going to be the only issue in urban soil, urban gardening.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to ask you to stay tuned on this and contribute as well, because over the next couple months, we're going to have a new fellow joining on Public Lab who's going to be working specifically on soil and soil testing. And I know that any questions that you have to seed that project would be really helpful for that fellow to be able to springboard off of too, and others, to drum up some interest there, because we should be able to fill in those question marks.
Yeah, so share your questions so we can get on them.
And I'm not sure if there's a reason why we weren't being specific about who's working on lead in the broader public lab community, but just Ira, in the chat for the Zoom, I just shared an article about soil research that happened in Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Oh, excellent.
And that lists Francesca Landis, who is kind of a friend of Public Lab. We're not directly collaborating with them yet, but we're trying to figure it out, how the Earth Institute can popularize their more accessible lead screening method. So that's one of the projects. Then the other organization that Bronwyn mentioned is a group that had a huge environmental justice win up in the Buffalo area. They began on air quality and held a coke plant accountable. And now some of the fines, which are considerable in the tens of millions of dollars, are being invested to identify further pollution that the company's pollution may have left in the soil where people are living. So they already got them on air pollution. Now they're going into soil, and they're partnered with a lab, and they have a method. And you can find that at csresources.org.
Great. One of the short answers was to the question, is there lead in the soil, was that the soil that we're using has been it's all new construction. So it's new soil, but that really doesn't answer the question. That might have been bad soil to begin with. So it probably should be tested no matter what.
Also, I just replied to that same post of Reed's with a couple links, one of which is to the UMass Amherst Soil Lab. I know that list is collecting non-lab dependent tests, but just until we have some more that address soil testing outside the lab, there's one there that's a $20 test and one that's an EPA approved test for $55 for lead in soil.
Nice.
In case that's helpful until we get ones that are outside the lab.
That's great.
Oh, I'm really excited about the next couple months with Reed's work. Really incredible initiative, and then another soil fellow coming in. Yeah, if anyone has questions on how do you subscribe to lead updates on the website or anything like that, please email us or just email me. We'll help you.
Me being Liz at publiclab.org or Stevie at publiclab.org or anybody on the call. Great. Well, thanks everybody for jumping on. It's been a great open hour, lots of sharing and lots of exciting things clearly coming down the not lead pipe.
Thank you.
All right. Well, the call will be archived on the publiclab.org/openhour-archive page, and I will share the link out once it's posted. And we're always, any questions or things that come up after, please post them up on Public Lab, and they will become part of this same archive, and people will be able to answer them, and the information just continues to grow. So thanks everyone, and enjoy I think everyone's in the PM time zone now. Enjoy your evenings, and we'll catch you on the next open hour.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Reed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all. Talk to you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.